I think we are ready to get started. So let me do a quick intro. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm very excited about the session that we have today. I'm sure all of you guys are excited as well. Now, everybody, if you're on LinkedIn, you probably follow or know MJ. Nonetheless, if you have been living in a different world and you're not on LinkedIn, and if you're not following her, she is the VP of Marketing at Firetrace. We've been connected on LinkedIn for a while. I'm not sure how that happened, just kind of marketers running in different circles. But I started paying very close attention, by the way, MJ, there are marketers who repeat the same thing that you hear, correct? And it's like, oh, yeah, I've heard this one before. Oh, yeah, okay, so this is the motivational piece. But then there are marketers who say something and really would make you stop. And it's like, oh, I didn't think about this. This is a completely different perspective. And there's, by the way, I'm connected, I don't know, 6,000-7,000 people. There are, I think, about less than 10 people who do that, where they stop me and I'm like, oh, this was very, very insightful, and I'm sharing it. And then I started listening to the Industrial Marketer podcast, which was also fun from the very first episodes where you guys were kind of figuring things out until kind of seeing the evolution, which has been really awesome. So as I'm talking to MJ, and I'm like, and I know kind of the marketing that they do, it was sort of interesting to see the different accounts that they target between the small accounts and the big accounts. And I thought to myself, I'm like, you know what? For me at Invesp, this is a problem that we deal with all the time. We have the small companies that come to us that want to spend less than $10,000, and we also have the big accounts that also want to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. So how do you target both? Now I can go out and try and figure it out, and by that translates into spending a lot of money, getting very frustrated, and not succeeding right away. A year later, you probably can figure it out. Or probably a smarter thing to do is to invite MJ to host this and teach us something very, very useful. So MJ, we're really excited to have you join us. And having said that, why, it's all yours.
Lovely. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, so today we're going to talk about revenue marketing. And what I mean by that is how to design your marketing process to produce revenue. And as Khalid mentioned, that is going to be regardless of whether you're targeting large enterprise accounts where you can be closing opportunities that are $500,000 or more at a time. This process also has worked for markets where you're targeting a much wider customer base, and the opportunity sizes are $2,500, $5,000 at a time. So it works either way, and I know because it's been battle tested in both markets here at Firetrace. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through my process and my team's process that we use to design marketing campaigns that generate revenue in both ends of the market. Take you through the different steps. Because this is kind of a high level, this is how the steps to drive revenue. I'm not going to do too much of a deep dive on any one of the steps, nor do I honestly think that I'm the most qualified person to do a deep dive in any one particular step, but I will point you to some of the most important things that I've learned over the last kind of year and a half building and running this process at Firetrace, and maybe some other resources that could help you do a deep dive into any one piece of the process that you want to kind of firm up your understanding of. So with that, let's get into it. First, quick background on me and Firetrace. Khalid already kind of gave a little bit of a background. I'm the VP of Marketing. At Firetrace, I'm in charge of marketing, strategic marketing, product management, and growth. So we have a small but mighty team of 4 people, plus myself, and we cover all of those bases. But today we're going to focus mainly on the strategic marketing and the growth marketing piece, and we'll leave product for another time. Firetrace makes systems that automatically detect and suppress fires. So over here on the right-hand side of the screen, I've got a picture of kind of what our system looks like. It looks like kind of like a fire extinguisher, but it's a little more high tech. And then right next to that picture, you see kind of a red tube winding through kind of an electrical cabinet. Believe it or not, that red tube is actually a fire detector. So that's our proprietary technology for detecting fires and putting them out. And then up on the top there, you see it installed in the wild in a machine shop. So we're B2B. We sell to lots of different end customers, but they're all businesses. None of our products go into consumer applications. So we sell to both small and medium-sized businesses and enterprise, as I kind of intimated. So I'll be talking about some of the differences between how we market to each of those types of customers. But overall, the process is the same for both. So we'll start with the process and then get into the differentiation there towards the end. We also have 3 sales channels. Sometimes we sell direct to the customer. Sometimes we sell via a channel called OEM. I apologize if I use this acronym. It means original equipment manufacturer, which means that we're selling our product and it gets bolted on to another piece of equipment and then sold on by the manufacturer of that equipment. And then finally, aftermarket distribution. So like a value-added reseller where we sell it to them and then they package it up with some services and sell it on. The only reason I tell you that is because if you think attribution is a nightmare for your business, imagine how much of a nightmare it is for my business. So I'll tell you kind of how we've been tackling the attribution channel with all of those, or sorry, the attribution challenge with all of those sales channels as well. I don't know that I have the perfect solution, but I'll tell you what my solution is. One other thing I want to just mention is this is the standard Firetrace like sales deck template that I put all this information into. So sometimes there's going to be photos that are just photos of our customers' applications. They're not relevant to what's on the slide, but this is the deck I'm working with, so I apologize for that. All right. Okay, so quick recap. We are going to talk about how to tie marketing to revenue, and more importantly, how to drive revenue through marketing. And then at the end of the presentation, we will talk about how that process can be adapted for both large deals, $500K and more, as well as small deals less than $5,000. So let's start with a high-level picture of the framework. This is basically a breakdown of all the steps we go through to build a marketing process that generates revenue with new types of customers. The first step is focus. The next step is build your team, research the customers, start building your content, distribute your content, and then analyze the results. And I choose the word analyze as opposed to measure, because when we analyze results, we're measuring and we're looking at quantitative results, but the qualitative results are really, really important as well. And actually, I depict this originally as a linear process, but in reality, the first 2 steps are linear. You need to focus and pick your team, but the next 4 steps happen in a cycle. So you do your research, you create content, you distribute the content, and then you get a ton of useful feedback, especially qualitative feedback, which then in turn fuels future research. So maybe you get some interesting comments about an angle on a topic you haven't considered before, and you dive into some research along that angle. That inspires future content, and you can also get some insights quantitatively on how to adapt your distribution to make it more effective. So you get better and better each time you go around that cycle of those latter 4 steps. So I'm going to dive into each of those steps, tell you about how we do them, and tell you about some of the key things I've learned, things that might help you build your own process that looks maybe like this, maybe a little different. Okay, so step number 1 is to focus. And by focus, I mean pick a couple of markets that you want to aim your marketing at. And the reason that I think that this is quite possibly the most important step in the whole process is because going through this whole process, I think it was 7 steps, is pretty resource intensive, and you want to make sure that you get it right. So because it's resource intensive, the number of different markets you can do at the same time, it will depend on the size of your team. But as a rule of thumb, over the last 12 to 18 months, what I have kind of come to believe is that a team of 2, a really good team of 2, can create meaningful pipeline within about 6 to 12 months. One of our teams created meaningful pipeline within 4 months. And I'll add to that, on the next slide, I'll talk to you about who needs to be on your team, what the different skill sets are, or maybe 2 slides from now. So it could be a team of 2, but it might also need to be a team of 3. What you're really looking for is to get all the skill sets on the team. And so if 2 people can cover all the skill sets, that'll be a 2-person team. So if you have a team of 10 and everybody has all these skill sets, you might be able to do 5 markets in parallel to one another. But if you only have a very small team, I would really implore you to focus on one market at a time, or maybe two markets at a time. And that takes a lot of discipline. So this might be an area where you're going to have a challenging conversation with your executive team or your sales team. I am very fortunate to be on the executive team, so I get to influence the direction that we go. But this is an area that I could see there being some friction. You know, some executive teams, some sales teams might want to go after lots of markets all at once. So you as a marketer, your job is going to be to sell the idea internally that it's going to be easier to gain traction if you focus on one market at a time. And that goes back to a really fundamental concept in marketing, which is that consumers have to see a message or a piece of information something like 6 times before it really resonates with them and before they really internalize the message and remember it. And I can tell you from experience that we saw the results of consumers seeing 4 or 5 or 6 of our campaigns. And that's when people start coming to us as inbound leads looking to explore our solution. It wasn't after the first campaign, it was after 4 or 5 or 6. And because of that, you need to be producing 4 or 5 or 6 campaigns with the same message, which goes back to this idea that sometimes it can take 4, 5, 6, even 12 months to really start gaining traction and getting that acceleration. So doing that stakeholder analysis and setting those expectations properly will help you be successful in the long run as you're trying to build an effective relationship with your executive team and your sales team. So I want to dive a little bit deeper into what I mean when I say focus on one particular market. And I think this might be a little bit of a hot take. So I have seen a lot of companies, particularly SaaS companies, that segment their markets by SMB and enterprise. And I think in a lot of cases, quite possibly most cases, that's not a distinction that goes far enough. And the reason I say that is because you could have 2 small to medium-sized businesses, and those 2 small to medium-sized businesses could use your product and get the benefit of your product totally differently. But if you lump them all into the same group and market to them the same way, your messaging is either going to be irrelevant for some subsegment of them, or it's going to be overly generic and it's not going to resonate. And so to bring that concept to life, I just want to talk about an example from my career. This was actually at my last company where we sold water quality sensors. And so 2 of the subsegments that we sold water quality sensors to were aquaculture, so fish farming, which is that picture on the top, and then hydroponics, which is growing plants and seeds and vegetables in water instead of in soil. So both of these applications use water quality sensors, but the benefits that the customers get are totally different. So when you're looking at aquaculture, that sensor will be installed out in the middle of the lake or in the middle of the ocean. And this can be a very dirty, mucky environment. And it will get covered in mud and soot and grime. And this will cause the readings to be erratic, or it will break. And if that happens, somebody's going to have to get in a boat and drive out to wherever that sensor is. And they're going to have to pull it out and clean it or replace it or whatever. So to this business owner, who is a small business owner with their fish farm, the big value proposition is going to be durability. If the sensor can stand up in that environment and not have to be replaced constantly, that's going to save them a lot of time, and time is money. So durability is the big benefit, or it's the feature that provides the benefit of kind of being hands-free with this particular device. On the other hand, in the hydroponics application, you've got sensors that are controlling chemical dosing equipment that puts the nutrients into the water so that the plants can grow. And you can imagine if that sensor reading is off, you're either going to overdose or underdose your plants. And it's a very sensitive balance. So in that particular application, again, a small to medium-sized business, but the selling point is accuracy, not durability. So you can see that if I market to both of these subsegments the same way, or I create the same content for both of them, I'm either going to be marketing effectively to one and not the other, or I'm going to just be talking about durability and accuracy all the time, which doesn't get down to the root of those benefits that I just explained to you, those being not having to drive your boat out into the middle of the lake all the time to fix stuff, or making sure that your plants have exactly the right balance of nutrients as opposed to having more or less of what they need. So ultimately, if you don't get the segmentation right, then you're going to be creating content that is either far too vague, or it's going to be focused on your features of durability and accuracy as opposed to the customer's benefits. And again, I just want to reemphasize this point that this is an area where you need to do stakeholder analysis with your exec team, because it takes discipline to pick just one market and run at it. But it's better to get one market right than to try to do 12 and get them all wrong. So once you've picked your market, the next step is to identify your team. And there are 3 skill sets basically that I think need to be on a team in order to be successful at designing and executing revenue marketing campaigns. The first one is product marketing. And I'm going to explain what I mean by each of these, because I think people use a lot of these terms interchangeably. So product marketing, this person spends time with customers and understands what they care about. So talking to customers all the time. Usually, if you're selling a technical product, this person has a very good understanding of how the product works and what the customers are trying to do with it. And they understand what the customers care about, so they can kind of feed you ideas, and they can be the strategist that says, we need to communicate these messages to these people in this format. So they're going to provide kind of the architecture of your campaign. The next person is a content person. This person knows how to write in a way that is very easy to understand, and also how to optimize either writing or any other format for content in a way that makes sense for how you're going to distribute it. And that's a preview of the distribution step. But for example, if you're going to distribute an article via SEO, the article has to be written for SEO. If you're not going to distribute it via SEO, if you're going to pay to distribute it, then you can write it however you want. It doesn't have to, be emphasized around keywords. And then the last person I'm going to call demand gen. This person runs your paid campaigns. They understand the numbers, they love the numbers, and they can on the fly adjust for the result that you want. So first of all, they know what conversion should you be optimizing for, and what parameters can I play with on the fly as this ad is running to make sure that we get the most bang for our buck with the content we've created. Ideally, if you want to have a team of 2, ideally, I think it is great if your product marketing person can also do content. However, I think in a lot of cases, this is kind of a unicorn. But I used to be a product marketing person that wrote content, and it's a lot easier because you don't have the knowledge transfer challenge, right? The knowledge is in your head, you put it to paper, and then your content makes sense for the customers because you wrote it and you spend time with customers. So if I was going to combine any 2 of these into a 2-person team as opposed to a 3-person team, that's probably the one I would gravitate towards if you know the person or can find the person who's capable of these things. So now that you've got a team and you know where you're going to focus, the next stage is research. Especially important if you're looking to market to a new set of customers. So if you're trying to generate new demand, with customers that are in hydroponics and you've never sold to that market before, you really need to do thorough research to understand this ideal customer profile from all angles. I feel like everybody always says this. It's a very easy thing to say, but just to give you something tangible to hang on to and take away from this, a rule of thumb that I like to use is before designing a campaign for a new set of customers, you should spend at least 10 hours talking to customers one-to-one in non-sales situations. And the reason you do that is so that you can get the broad context of that customer's world, because usually a sales conversation is only going to focus on our solution, your benefits. End of the process, very specific. You kind of have blinders on to your product's value proposition as opposed to everything else they have going on. But when you're architecting a campaign, you want to take into consideration everything else that is going on, because you're facing the challenge of trying to get this person to pay attention to your product when they have many other things going on that they could be paying attention to. So you have to acknowledge that those are real, which is why I like to do non-sales situations. 10 hours is enough. If you talk to 10 people for 1 hour each, you will definitely spot trends, and you can use that in your content, and you can use that to build your messaging. I am not going to go into the nitty gritty of how to do this right now because we don't have time. But if you would like to know how I approach customer listening, I did do an episode with the B2B Growth podcast on this particular topic. So you can look that up. I think it came out on October 5th, or you can just DM me on LinkedIn and I can answer your questions.
And we'll make sure that we put actually a link to that also on whenever we publish the session. So we'll put a link to the recording as well. So awesome. That would be good.
So you'll emerge from your research, hopefully with two things. And those two things are content ideas and a very solid, clear understanding of what your value proposition is to the customer. And I'll stop here and pause for a moment and say the best architected marketing campaigns in the world will never produce revenue results if you don't have product market fit. And so a goal of your research should be to understand if you have product market fit in the segment that you are going after. And if you don't, then you'll hear from customers that, either doing nothing is less risky than investing in your solution, or there's something else that's cheaper or better that they're using and they don't want to switch. If you do have product market fit, your research conversations, which are not sales conversations, may start turning into sales conversations. So that's a good indicator that yes, we have product market fit. I've gone out and with the pure intention of conducting market research to understand a value proposition, and I've had people want to buy stuff from me at the end of the conversation, which always confuses the sales team quite a lot. So you should come out with your value proposition really clear and your content ideas. And so once you've got your value proposition and you're ready to create your content, I kind of want to pause here and talk about my philosophy on content. And basically the way I think about content is it's a low risk way that your buyers can explore your value proposition. And the reason that I think of it that way is because I had this realization in the last 2-3 years that of your target audience, not everybody is going to be in buy mode. But the problem you face as a marketer, I would actually estimate that only 3 to 5% of any given group of buyers is actually in buy mode, ready to buy now. The problem you face as a marketer is that you have no way of knowing who's in buy mode and who's not in buy mode for the most part. And so you're having to market to everyone, even though only the ones in buy mode are really going to turn into revenue in the next couple of months. So what you need to do is find a way to market to everyone and capture both the people that are in buy mode while building brand awareness and building a positive affinity with the rest of the market that's not in buy mode, because eventually those people will be in buy mode. So if you hit people that are not in buy mode with buy messaging, it's not going to penetrate their brain. They're not going to remember you. They're going to keep scrolling through it. And then when they are in buy mode, you will have missed out on this opportunity to build awareness of your brand. If you hit them with messaging that is helpful to them and elaborates on the value proposition that is relevant to them because you've done your research, then over time, they start to understand all the nuances of your message. And when it finally kind of clicks and they say, this is a big problem for me, I'm ready to take action, and they shift from not in buy mode over to buy mode, first of all, your brand is the first one they think of. So when they start a very concerted research process that a lot of buyers do at the beginning of buy mode, a very deliberate research process, they'll probably come to your website first and look for your product messaging. But also because they've consumed so much of your message in bite-sized chunks over many months at a time, when it finally does get to the point where they have to have that conversation with the sales team, it's much easier for the sales team to explain the nuances because the customer already has a good understanding and has already had the chance to process a lot of the messages that the sales team is going to try to portray. So it definitely makes it easier for them down the road, and it gives you a big advantage over the competition for closing these buy mode customers into revenue generating customers. So that's how I think about content. And then I have 2 rules for content. So you want to create content that breaks down your value proposition into bite-sized chunks for your customers. And I think the 2 best ways to do that and to get people to consume it, which is your goal for content, you want people to digest and consume these messages. And I think the best ways to get people to actually read it, as opposed to tuning it out as noise, is number 1, to tell them something new. And what I mean by that is this content or something similar to it cannot be available anywhere else. And some examples of that are original research. If you can get either a journalist or a agency that focuses on original research, or even a university, if you want to go all out and you're marketing to high value customers, you can go get them to mine, find, and identify data that nobody else has, and then you can package that up as a high value content resource. People love that, and they are much more likely to consume that content. And within that data and research, I mean, first of all, presumably the data supports the point you're trying to make about the value that your product brings into the world. But you can also weave in messages and elaborate on some of those nuanced messages about your product that eventually will come up in that sales conversation. The second one is exclusive interviews with industry experts. People like to hear from people like them. And it's a way of building social proof into your messaging. So if you can get an expert that's not from your team to talk about your product and talk about other things that interest people, and nobody else has any content featuring that expert, then your content will stand out and people will gravitate towards it. And then the last one, believe it or not, is case studies. So we use case studies almost like top of the funnel content. So we'll tell the story of how a customer benefited from a product, and we will pay Facebook or pay LinkedIn to place that case study in the feed of thousands and thousands of people in our target market. This is for the mid market, $5,000 at a time. There's fewer customers in the big $500,000 markets, but and that might be a first piece of content they've ever seen from us, and it works. It builds brand awareness. People love case studies, and it resonates with them more because they can believe that this problem, in our case of fire, might happen to them because it's happened to somebody who looks like them. And so case studies are a great form of original content. The second rule for content, if you want people to actually consume it, is to make evergreen concepts easier to understand. So what I mean by that is there's all kinds of blog posts, what is this? 7 things to remember about this. We're going to explain this technical concept and break it down and make it easy to understand. I mean, any competitor in your space that knows how to do SEO is going to be creating those blog posts. And to stand out, you need to make your version of it the easiest to understand. And I think the 2 ways you do that are great copywriting and great graphic design. If you create original graphics and infographics that break things down visually, it goes a really long way to making your content stand out. And so I think it's worth competing on those evergreen topics, but you got to make sure that you're competing to win. Okay, so once you have a piece of content, then you're on to distribution, because you want as many people who fit your ideal customer profile as possible to consume that content. And one of the biggest game changers for me when it comes to think about content distribution is thinking about channels in terms of intent versus no intent. And what I mean by that is, when your customer is on this channel, does that indicate that they intend to purchase something? And so the answer to that question is yes, if you're talking about SEO and paid search. If I go onto Google and I search fire suppression system, there's a good chance that I'm looking to buy a fire suppression system. And that's when your SEO, organic results, or your paid search ads are going to show up on Google. So think about the content behind those ads, like what page are those people going to when they search fire suppression system? Is it a page that adequately meets their needs, given that they're probably intending to buy this? On the other hand, the answer is no if you're talking about paid social or email most of the time, and sometimes PR as well. So if I am on Facebook, that does not mean that I want to buy a fire suppression system, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't market fire suppression systems to me on Facebook. It means that you should market some angle of your message to me in a way that I will feel excited about diverting from whatever other thing I'm doing on Facebook and going to consume that content. And a buy now ad is unlikely to resonate with me when I'm on a channel where I'm not intending to buy. So after seeing this, you might be thinking, okay, well, earlier in this presentation, I said that you can't identify the buyers that are in buy mode, but this seems like you can identify the buyers in buy mode, and that's true. The problem is that you will probably eventually hit a ceiling for the number of people that are on these yes intent to buy channels. And that's what I mean by only 3 to 5% of your target market is probably in buy mode at any given time. So what will happen is after a certain spend level on paid search or after a certain traffic level on organic, you're going to either start seeing your leads level off, or you're going to start seeing, if you spend more above that threshold, you're going to start seeing leads that are not relevant. So I think this is a trap that a lot of companies fall into with paid search. They will target broad keywords that have nothing to do with their product. And we actually did this at Firetrace before I came. I talked to you earlier about OEMs, original equipment manufacturers. We were targeting the keywords for the types of equipment that they make, not us. And when somebody is Googling wind turbine, they're not looking to buy a fire suppression system. Maybe they're looking to buy a wind turbine. I don't know. But a lot of companies fall into this trap of, okay, well, we got all the traffic for fire suppression system. So now we're going to go out and go for broader keywords and get that traffic too. And maybe some of those will convert. And the reality is either you're giving them information that they're not looking for and they're going to leave, or you're going to convert them, but it's not somebody who is a qualified lead for your sales team. So you have to have the discipline to say, okay, we've maxed out the intent channel. Now, if we have budget over and above that, we're going to put it into other channels and start building demand with those no intent buyers. This can happen very fast, or it can happen very slow, depending on your industry. So at the water sensor company, it happened very slow. I was able to continue increasing and increasing and increasing my paid search budget, and the leads kept ticking up and up and up and up, and they kept being relevant. At Firetrace, we maxed out our paid search budget in the first 2 to 4 months. And then after that, everything over and above went into paid social. So it depends on your industry, and you just have to experiment. Tick up your search budget. Start with, what I would recommend is with paid search to start with 5 terms that are hyper relevant to your business. So for us, an example might be FM 200 fire suppression system. That's a long tail keyword, right? So we bid on that, and that's definitely going to be relevant for us. And then test 2 slightly broader keywords each month and see what kind of leads you get. And if they're still pretty relevant, if 75% or more are relevant, then keep bidding on that term. If 20% of them are relevant, then you have to decide, should I keep bidding on that term, or should I put that money into a channel that's not an intent channel, but is going to be more relevant to me? So in order to keep scaling past the ceiling of your intent channels, you need to move the rest of your dollars into no intent channels. And those are usually PR, paid social, email, distributing content at all parts of the buying funnel to people who may not be looking to buy, but if your content is compelling enough, it will kind of enter that buying journey and interrupt whatever else they were doing. Okay, so once you've distributed content, you want to measure your performance. And as I said at the beginning of this, we go through a bunch of different sales channels, and attribution can get super messy very quickly. And because of that, we just completely simplified the whole thing. So I personally only look at 2 metrics, and those are number of qualified opportunities on a month-to-month basis and dollars of qualified pipeline. And further, I only look at those metrics, number of qualified opportunities and dollars of qualified pipeline, if the leads associated with those opportunities match the ideal customer profile that I am marketing to in that month. And so I'm correlating what marketing campaigns did we run to how many opportunities did we generate with those types of customers in that month. And so it's not perfect, right? And I've had people call me out on correlation is not causation. However, However, I am comfortable with this. I'm comfortable with this correlation, especially given that, just as a sample result for you, over the course of 12 months, we increased in one particular market that we are marketing to, we increased the number of qualified opportunities 100%. These qualified opportunities were closing at a rate of 30%. And so our revenue in that particular segment increased 30% over those 12 months. And this is the stuff we're tracking in our CRM, but I told you earlier, I have messy attribution because we have sales channels outside of our direct sales channel. And so at the same time, we saw that same percentage mirrored in our distribution network. So an additional 30% of leads came to the distributors, never came to us. And then we saw that revenue increase as well. So that to me doesn't sound like a coincidence. And again, I'm analyzing that data and choosing to come to that conclusion because it is correlation. But at the end of the day, the way we make decisions drives increased number of qualified opportunities and increased pipeline. And I would prefer to do that and use some correlation rather than build a whole pipeline with lots of metrics that could be leading me astray. So that's how we measure performance at Firetrace. Okay, so the last thing I want to do here before we talk about the difference between $500,000 deals and $5,000 deals is take you through a process putting it all together. So we started in this particular market, we started with search. So we talked to customers, we understood what the value was that our product held for them. And through this research, we also identified that these customers are very engaged with key industry influencers on Instagram. And these industry influencers, surprise, right? B2B on Instagram. These industry influencers had between 15,000 and 40,000 followers. And so we built relationships with them. We interacted with their content. Eventually, they kind of knew who we were. And eventually, in January 2019, one of these influencers with a following of 40,000 had a fire, and he had our product, and our system put it out. And his security camera in his shop caught the whole thing on video. And because we had done our research and we had built a relationship with him, we knew he was influential. We just reached out to him. He knew who we were. And we said, can we do a case study with this? And he agreed, and he gave us the video, and he posted about it on his personal account, and he tagged us, and it was great. So we got this video from him. And we knew that that was going to be a very strong asset because our product puts out fires. So you can see the value proposition in 5 seconds when you watch this machine burst into flames and then immediately the flames go out. And there's nothing that this guy has to do. It's picture perfect, right? So we knew it was a really strong asset. And so we wanted to pair it with exceptional copywriting. And I told you earlier that my team is small and nimble. We don't have a copywriter on the team. So we've got kind of a marketing operations and content marketing combined role, jack of all trades. She wears a lot of hats. Thank goodness for her. However, we said, all right, we're going to really level this one up. We're going to have a journalist write it. So we asked a personal friend of mine who is a journalist. We said, okay, we have a phone call recording of this machine shop owner telling us everything that happened in this fire and also telling us about his business and why what it took to build this business. He took out a collateral loan on his motorcycle when he was 21, and he built this business from the ground up. And all of those tidbits comes back around to our original research, because the value proposition we were talking about is this product can save your business. So we wanted to explore that angle of this is all the grit that went into building this business. So imagine if he lost it, right? So we had that recording, we gave it to the journalist, and she returned the most beautiful copy, right? Her job is to write copy that's really easy to read and tell stories. And so she delivered us that. It was $1 a word. So this costed about $750 to have the journalist write up the case study. And we were able to pair it with that video. We distributed it via Facebook and YouTube. So we took the CCTV video, we gave it to kind of like a video editing, graphic designer, creative person, freelancer, and he cut it into a video with some cool messaging. It's pinned to our company page on LinkedIn if you want to see it. It's pinned to the top. Firetrace International. And so we used that. It's 15 seconds. We distributed it via YouTube pre-roll, and it was viewed, and that means people watched the whole thing as opposed to just seeing the beginning, 417,000 times. And then the case study on Facebook was clicked through. So they went to the landing page and consumed the content, which is one of the things we want them to do, 100,000 times. And because these channels are cheaper, all of those hundreds of thousands of impressions and views and people consuming the content only cost us $8,000. Eventually, the campaign drove over 6 figures and closed 1 revenue in the middle of a pandemic. So we launched the campaign in March, and our this particular market was hit kind of hard by the pandemic, and nonetheless, our return on ad spend was over 10x. So at the end of all of this, as a result, we doubled down on building these relationships with Instagram influencers. And ultimately, a few months later, we joined forces with 2 Instagram influencers and ran a webinar with them. And that was also our best performing webinar ever. So putting it all together, this really allowed us to build customer intimacy within this segment of our business. It also, using my famous correlation measurement system, was a very quantitatively high performing ad campaign as well. So it was a little bit opportunistic, I guess you could say, but the reason that we were able to take advantage of this opportunistic campaign is because we were in the market and doing the research and proactively looking for these opportunities. So final slide, I think, which is what is the difference between a 5K deal and a 500K deal? And I really think there's only 2 differences that are worth talking about. We use the same process in our mid-market. So that was a mid-market campaign that I just talked to you about. On the enterprise side of our business, we're generating inbound pipeline that is closer to 7 figures as opposed to 6 figures. The 2 differences are, first of all, another hot take. I think that the B2B buying committee is kind of a myth. So if you're looking at the mid-market deals where the opportunity size is $5,000, in a lot of cases, there's not 7 decision makers, there's 1 decision maker. And so in that market that I just talked to you about, there is 1 decision maker. And if you're selling SaaS to Firetrace, there's 1 decision maker. So those are a couple examples where you don't always have to think of things in terms of a B2B buying committee, especially when the product is not super expensive. And I would say for a small to medium-sized business, the signing limit for a director or a VP is probably $10,000 or $15,000. So if it's less than that, there might just be 1 decision maker. That simplifies both your research and your content phases of this process, because that means when you're doing research, you can talk to the 1 decision maker 10 times and then you're done. And when you're creating content, you create content for that decision maker. And sometimes you can create content for people who might influence that decision maker as well. But if you don't have the time or the resources to do that from all those angles, you can market to that decision maker. The second one is that with a $500,000 opportunity, you can spend more to acquire that account. So, if you're going to sell something for $5,000, don't spend $4,500 acquiring every lead. I mean, maybe you actually could do that, but don't spend $10,000 acquiring every lead because you're going to lose money on that. On the flip side, if you're gonna make $500,000 from the account, you can spend $50,000, $100,000 acquiring them, and that's fine because it's worth it. And the part of the process that impacts is content distribution. So what channel are you choosing? And also sometimes it impacts content. So you can spend a lot of money creating an excellent piece of content if you're going to use that content to generate $500,000 opportunities. But I think the main place that I look at it is in terms of distribution. And just as an example, we only use Facebook and YouTube for mid-market. And we'll only put LinkedIn in the mix if we're looking at enterprise, because the cost per acquisition for leads sourced through LinkedIn is much, much higher. And the unit economics of it just don't make sense for us at the mid-market level. You're going to have to run those numbers for your business. The obvious advantage of LinkedIn is the data set is incredible, right? So you might not be able to target the people you want to target on Facebook, but look into it on Facebook, because I think you'd be surprised by how good the targeting can be for certain industries. And we've obviously had success with Facebook in B2B. So you can have success with Facebook in B2B, but you might have to use LinkedIn. And if you're going to focus only on LinkedIn, make sure that the cost of acquisition makes sense compared to the close rate and compared to the opportunity sizes. So if you're going to spend $100,000 acquiring an account, and or you're going to spend $100,000 creating an opportunity, and only 1 in 10 of those opportunities close, that means you're spending $1 million to acquire a customer. So you better hope that that customer is a $2, $3, $4 million customer. If you're spending less, then that customer could be smaller. But always divide out the number that actually closed, and that's why you need to watch the whole process through your CRM and understand those close rates as well. So those are really the two differences between 5K deals and 500K deals. Everything else we do is pretty much the same. And that is all I had in terms of material to run through. And I would love to open it up for questions.
Awesome. And we have many, many, many questions. MJ, that was just absolutely awesome. So by the way, and before we jump into questions, if you have not connected with MJ on LinkedIn, go ahead, do that. Thank me later. Just really, really good content. And it's amazing, by the way, like, because you're getting like, pieces of amazing content every day, small to consume, make you think. I mean, I've always told people I've signed up for LinkedIn back in 2007, but I've only been on LinkedIn since 2020. That's when I started saying, I'm like, oh, you know what? This could be interesting. So let's jump into some of the questions over here. So somehow, I got questions even on Facebook. I'm like, why not use Zoom? Would make my life easier. So I have my phone open. I have a whole bunch of messages from everywhere. So John is asking, are you using the term markets to cover industries and markets? I think some of them you answered, but nonetheless, I want to ask the question.
Yeah, industries for sure. And I think the trap I've seen people fall into is confusing an industry, or a segment, as we call it, with an application. So if you think about like our industrial manufacturing segment or market, there are a couple of different things within any given industrial manufacturing site that you could protect using our products. You could protect a CNC machine, you could protect a dust collector. Each of those things is an application, but the market is industrial manufacturing. And the reason you want to focus on the market as opposed to the application is because you're looking for the person who is in charge of making this decision. You market to people, not to machines. So if the person is the same, then you can use the same marketing regardless of what the application may be.
That makes sense. And our friends from Gorilla 76 are saying hi. So hello, guys. Hello, ladies, gentlemen. I used the term guys to refer to guys and girls, but then I was told this is wrong. So now I'm like, ladies and gentlemen, So, let me ask you this question. We talked a little bit about content. Your thoughts in general on gated versus non-gated content.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? Should we be using one versus the other? What do you guys do? What works? To be honest,
we use both, kind of. So in general, we ungate everything. I would say 90% of what we're driving traffic to is ungated because, as I was saying before, I think of content as a way that customers can explore your value proposition in bite-sized pieces. And so you want them to have no barriers to doing that. You want them to have no barriers to absorbing the information. So if you put a gate there, that's creating a barrier, and you might lose 60% of the people that would otherwise interact with your brand and your message. However, when we do a big, like high value piece of content, like a piece of original research, we'll create a landing page that lets people download the content without submitting their information, but we will also on the same page put a form where they can get that piece of information emailed to them if they would like. And we found that about 30 to 40% of people fill out the form, even if they have the option to download it without filling out the form. So if that's the case, then I kind of figure why not?
That makes sense. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of interesting that you say that because especially on my phone, I would go somewhere I'm like, oh, this is interesting, but I'm on my phone. And sometimes I'm in the car and like, somebody's driving. And I'm like, you know what? Email it to me. Here's my email. Give me the PDF. I'll read it much later, and I wouldn't rely on bookmarking. I mean, I end up with all these bookmarks that I've had for years. And I'm like, I never look at them. So email me the documents.
Yeah, and those are exactly the types of behaviors that we're looking for when we create a page that has both a form and a download now button.
Awesome. So our friend Matthew Chanella is asking, and this goes, by the way, to, and I think this is an important piece, very important question. You talked about the 3 different roles on the marketing team and what can you merge. So he's asking, can you impactfully outsource any of product, content, or demand gen in your team, or do you need in-house for all those different roles?
I think demand gen is the easiest to outsource, and in fact, we do outsource it. Content, I think, can go both ways. I think it's ideal to have it in-house, especially like as I talked about, if you have the magical unicorn on your team who is a product marketer and can do content. However, I think as long as you've got someone who's a very good communicator and a good manager of people and projects, that is a product marketer, you can have that person manage an external resource that is working on content. And I think the content will come out at a very similar quality level. Especially if that person, the product marketer internally on your team, does the final round of edits. And so the question is, do you have somebody on your team who's an effective enough communicator and manager that outsourcing the writing and the content production and then coming back for a final round of edits is actually faster and more efficient than them just doing it themselves? And if the answer to that is yes, then sure, outsource the content and have your product marketer kind of manage the process. That would also be a great way if you're in a leadership position looking to develop a product marketer into a future VP of marketing, that you could give them some opportunities to manage people and manage projects independently.
Awesome. Well, let me do a follow-up on this, because you said, okay, well, we might be able to outsource, or the role that is easier to outsource is the demand gen. And you had talked about the KPIs, the 2 KPIs that you look at, the 2 different metrics. When you bring on a demand gen agency, are you telling them, here are the metrics that I'm going to be looking at? What metrics, how does that communication initially works, and how long do you give them to show your results? And the reason I asked, by the way, again, selfish reason, because we're in the process of bringing a demand gen. One of our clients asked for that, and I'm like, never hired a demand gen agency. Let me see. So.
Okay, so this is part of that managing the timeline expectations effectively piece of the conversation, where I said it could take 6 to 12 months to be generating meaningful pipeline, maybe 3 to 4 if you really get lucky and the content resonates the first time that you send it out there. I would give it 6 months to see what kind of pipeline results you are creating and experiment. And maybe you don't turn up your ad spend until after that 6 months. Maybe you play with $5,000 a month until you hit 6 months, then you turn it up to 20. But I would say when we first started working with our demand gen agency, we did not know which metrics to measure. So that was actually part of the experimentation process. We were kind of figuring out what was correlating to actual revenue over time and building the dashboards. And I do think that the metrics that you measure may vary slightly from customer group to customer group. So I wouldn't be married or locked into one specific set of metrics. But I would make sure that you couple, our demand gen agency, when they're running our ads, they're looking at lower level metrics than just the revenue to manage. So they're trying to make spend as low as possible and increase conversions and all of that. And for the most part, that's very effective to have them managing that, and then we'll give them feedback on the revenue results. However, it's good to have the product marketing person or someone from your team looking at the qualitative feedback in the comments at the same time as the demand gen person's looking at the numbers, because you could have a piece of content, and this has happened to us before, where the numbers are excellent and the cost per click is super low and tons of people are seeing it, engaging with it, but they're all the wrong people. And the comments will tell you that. If they're comments from people that you don't care about and that you don't want to market to, you need to turn it off. Either you need to turn off audience expansion or you need to do it to a different audience.
Blake had a question. Now, unfortunately, I missed the context, so it's going to be difficult to ask the question. But in terms of when you're talking about, if you recall, we talked about, I think, the keywords and the targeting. Are we talking the hyper relevant? I think you had talked about the five hyper relevant keywords or terms. Are we talking about exact match? We're going very tactical over here.
So when I say hyper relevant, I mean like the meaning of that term is extremely relevant to your business. So an example of that is like Firetrace makes fire suppression systems, but we don't bid on the term fire suppression system, because when somebody types in fire suppression system, 9 times out of 10, they mean a sprinkler system. And that makes sense, right? Sprinkler systems are much more common than the specific niche product that we provide. So when I say hyper relevant, I mean that when somebody types that word, at least 6 or 7 times out of 10, they mean exactly your product.
Makes sense. That makes sense. Another question from Matthew. Is your distribution targeting strategy different on LinkedIn versus a channel like Facebook or YouTube? How do you approach, what kind of approach that you have between those different channels?
Yeah, I would say you just have to be careful on Facebook. LinkedIn, our strategy is different because LinkedIn has so much more data, like professional related data. So you have job history, you've got title, you've got function, you've got industry, all of this, you've got company name. On Facebook, it's probably originally created for B2C and you can just use it for B2B. So you've got things like you can target by age and gender and all of these things, but they're not really relevant for B2B. So on Facebook, the only audience metrics that we use are job title, education, and sometimes company name. Anything else, like don't use interest-based targeting on Facebook, at least from my experience. You can experiment with it, but it's really wildly inaccurate. So Facebook can be dangerous is what I would say to that. LinkedIn, you can experiment with lots of stuff, and a lot of the times the data is accurate and good on LinkedIn, so you don't have to be quite so careful.
It's good, but more expensive. So
yes.
choose your poison.
6 to 10x probably more expensive.
Yeah. You've mentioned the case study with that influencer on Instagram and the sprinkler. And this is a specific incident that you guys have had. Talk to us about the case studies process that you create. Are you looking for specific incidents or instances where your product helped, or no, you're looking for something more general? How do you go about creating a good case study? What's a good case study that you think of?
So I would say it's 2 things. First of all, yeah, specific instance where your product helped. I probably have it pretty easy because if somebody used our product, it means that otherwise their business would have burned to the ground. So it's pretty easy to say, here's the benefit of the product, right? And I would say that the secret sauce really is in storytelling, though, because you're trying to provide the message that, hey, if you use our product, you will avoid X bad outcome, and then you'll achieve this good outcome. And if you use a storytelling structure, which is just there's a beginning, a middle, and end, there's a main character, they have to overcome this problem, and when they succeed, it looks like this. If you think about how you can weave that into your case study, that message of our product helps these people do this will just embed itself in the brain of the person that's reading it that much more readily.
I like that. A couple of other questions, and there's some questions also coming on the chat. But Daniel's asking, how do you incentivize previous customers, users to have an interview with you in B2B for research purposes? I'll comment about that, but I'll let you answer first because we spent quite a bit of time doing this.
Yeah, so first of all, I'll say this comes back around to social listening and watching your CRM, because the the first thing that you can do to increase your odds of success is to ask every single person you can possibly ask to try to get one yes. So if you're watching your CRM every day and you see some message that indicates that a customer got benefit from your product, reach out to that customer. Do it fast. Do it right after it happened when they have it fresh in their mind that your product produced a great outcome. Sometimes people post about your great outcomes on social media, so watch there for opportunities to reach out to people and try to build relationships with them proactively. So if you have an existing relationship with someone and then they benefit from your product, which was the case for us, then they're much more likely to say yes because they know who you are. And in all of those cases, I'll still send like a trinket, like, a coffee mug or something. And we usually will look at their Instagram or if it's available to us and see what kind of freebie would fit with their lifestyle and personalize it. But, you can always go the route of, hey, if you do this, we'll give you a $25 gift card. I've done that many times.
I think whatever you can do to talk to a customer, the value is there. And I tell you, I just sent an ex-customer of ex-client of us. I just sent him a coffee machine that cost about $350. But I was so grateful for the insights that I'm like, oh, this is worth tens of thousands of dollars for us. Let me ask a couple of other questions. There's definitely some questions that came through about influencers, and it's sort of interesting, B2B influencers. And here you're going to Instagram to find them. How did that come about? How did you figure this out? Do you think that we can apply this in other areas? I mean, everybody is on Instagram except for me, but
Yeah, I would say there's a good likelihood that your industry has influencers or at least a community of people on Instagram if there's something visually compelling about it. So machining is automatic metal cutting. It just looks cool, so people take pictures of it and they share it on Instagram. I honestly, the way we figured this out was just through experimentation. We were like, well, we didn't write it off, right? We didn't assume that Instagram was not going to be a good idea. So we looked on Instagram and all of a sudden, hey, there are a lot of people from our industry here. And so they're here, we'll spend some more time here. And when we first started out, we didn't know that it was necessarily going to be a great ad channel for us or a great demand gen channel, but we stuck around long enough to figure out that it was.
In terms of budgets, you had mentioned something by the way, the $5,000 budget in the first 6 months until you figure out your KPIs, then up it from there. And of course, I would say the more budget, the better, as long as you know what you're doing. Because I've also seen some. I've just done a video about $75,000 spent and zero results to show for it. No attribution, no nothing. I'm like, oh, you guys are just trying to support Facebook. Great, that you do that. You have lots of money. But what do you think if somebody's starting with the strategy that you've talked about between search versus social? What kind of budget allocation would you allocate? How would you up that up? What are your thoughts on that in general?
So I am an advocate of always try it, even if you don't have that much budget. I think in a B2B company, if you can't get management to let you have $2,000, $1,500 to test it, then it may be a good sign that this is always going to be an uphill battle with your management. Mm-hmm. So if you don't have any budget at all, I would try asking for $1,000 to $1,500 and frame it up in terms of exactly this conversation of, I think that I can produce revenue, right? And I would say you probably need about $1,500 a month to do, $1,500 per campaign, I would actually say, to get it in the size of your audience. Also, if you have a really small, very specific niche audience, then you might be able to reach them all for $700, right? Then you're getting into the territory of Facebook might not let you advertise to them, because if it's below 1,000 people, then they don't let you target that because of anonymity reasons. But in general, I think you could reach a decent number of people for $1,500. So you can run one campaign for that. But keep in mind that in some cases, it's going to take you 4 or 5 campaigns to actually break through with your messaging.
Now, would you start with Facebook or would you start with search? Where would that initial allocation?
You know, I answered that question under the assumption that most people are doing search already, which was a bad assumption. So if you're not doing any paid at all, I would probably start with search because I think that's low hanging fruit in most cases. And I would start the way I kind of explained earlier, which is pick 5 hyper relevant terms and only use those. And then, you know, layer on a couple more terms at a time or increase your ad spend for those 5 terms over time as you start seeing results come in.
Awesome. I see we've already crossed the 1 o'clock mark. I don't want to keep people for too long. There's still some questions. So how about if we do this? How about if I send you those questions on LinkedIn and you can start answering them? It'll be a good way for people to follow you, like, you know, and we'll do them like, you know, every day there's, I think there's 4 or 5 more questions.
Cool.
Awesome. Thank you everybody for joining and listening. What we do is basically we are going to be working on the audio of the recording, and then we are going to share it. So everybody's going to get a link to the full video. There's also going to be a smaller video. There was just so many really good bits of, you know, of information that MJ shared with us. So we're going to be also sharing those on social channels. If you enjoyed the session, please share it with others who will find it beneficial, who will benefit from it. Our next live session was supposed to be on November 3rd, but then it hit me. That's going to be election day, and we'll probably not very wise to do a session on that day. So we're going to push it until the 10th of November. But it should be interesting because we have somebody who used to run the experimentation at Microsoft, at several large companies, so you can talk to us about experimentation. Again, thank you everybody for joining. I hope that you enjoyed this. I enjoyed it tremendously. MJ, thank you for the time and for sharing your knowledge with us.
Thank you.
Take care.